Welcome to another episode of Israel at War. I'm Phyllis Sembler-Miller, and I'm very pleased to have a return guest, Dr. Michael Berenbaum. He's the director of the Sigi Ziering Institute and professor of Jewish Studies at the American Jewish University in Los Angeles. But what's really important is that he's just gotten back from another trip to Israel after October 7th, and he's going to give us a boots on the ground update. So, Michael, take it away.
As we speak today, on April 12th, 2024, this is the 189th day of the war. That already says something profound. Nobody expected the operation to last this long, and nobody expected the results to be quite as indecisive as they seem to be at this moment. I wish I had wonderful news to report. I do not. Let's start with the hostages. Hamas now claims it has only 40 hostages, which means the fate of the remaining hostages is unknown. Even who controls them and who has them, whether they're alive or dead, is just unknown to Israel, unknown to the United States, maybe even unknown to Hamas. That means that you're dealing with a situation in which the idea of winning the war decisively, crippling Hamas, and getting the hostages back now means that you're not going to achieve the third of the goals, at least not all of them, and perhaps not most of them. And one has to presume that many of them have died. We say that with sadness, we say that with pain, because there still are not only non-combatants, but elderly and young and women and the like under Hamas control. That's not going to happen. There is a sort of a two-ring dance, which is the only way Israel's going to get back the hostages it can get back is if it's threatening. And the only way, and if it keeps a strong stance. The second piece is that Israelis are now living their life with the war. If when I went in November, we felt we were paying shiva calls to the Israelis, as I go today, I feel that everybody has the war in background. Including, by the way, those who have people in the who have sons and daughters in the IDF. Everybody has the war in background. It's sort of the background nightmare that you talk about and feel, but it's your people are going to work. They're going out. They're going through their days. They're not glued to their television because we've reached a certain sense of stasis. The other part of what we have at this, and stasis means the following, that we're on the edge of Rafah. The other part of it is that Ramadan has ended, and consequently with Ramadan ending, there is a little bit less pressure to keep things on a low burner.
Pressure on Israel, to clarify, right?
A little bit pressure, less pressure on Israel to keep things on a low burner for fear of triggering the Muslim world attacking us during our holy month, our holiest month, and the like. What is the large scale thing is that Israel is not going to achieve its announced goals for the war, and everybody wonders what is the strategy. And the strategy of achieving not only they've decimated Hamas, they haven't eliminated Hamas. And the second problem is what I call the Colin Powell theory. If you remember back to the Iraq War, Colin Powell said to President George W. Bush, he said, there's a rule at Crate and Barrel, if you break it, you own it. Israel has now broken the Gaza Strip, and in one sense it owns it, and there is no viable plan for what to do with Israel owning it. And the American pressure has been to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. The problem becomes who delivers that humanitarian aid, not to the border, but to the streets and to the people. And that's what we mean when you say, if you break it, you own it. And nobody right now owns it. Israel is not putting the number of troops in to maintain it as an occupation. It feels that it would be dangerous to its troops to put that number of people in with that many Hamas fighters still going. So consequently, you have chaos, and the images of inadequate food, starvation, etc., are compelling, at least to the West, and at least for those who do not see it. There is tremendous tension at this point, and I think it's legitimate tension between America and Israel, asking Israel to think out and articulate a strategy, not just a series of tactics, as to what it wants to achieve, how it wants to achieve it. And indeed, the Rafah is the symbol of that, because Rafah seems to be the home of right now, the refuge place of 1.2 million Gazans. How do you get the Gazans to move from Rafah to facilitate an attack on Rafah and to allow Israel to finish off, as it were, or enable Israel, not allow, enable Israel to finish off the goal of at least destroying Hamas leadership. How that's done, nobody has figured out yet, because moving 1 million people is a dramatic type of thing. The good news is that you're not moving them in the dead of winter when the climate would be difficult. It is now beautiful in springtime in Israel, and that one must presume in Gaza. I went down to the edge of the Gaza border, and consequently the conditions are less harsh, but you need food, you need sanitation, you need a place for people to stay, and consequently it's a bad situation. Let's talk politics for a moment, which is that it was clear to me that 4 out of 5 Israelis don't trust the governmental leadership.
Wait, how many trusted the government leadership before October 7th?
Well, before October 7th, the Prime Minister of Israel had 64 votes in the Knesset and was solid in his stance, and there was no talk of there was talk of the problem of Bibi with regard to his own legal issues and the like, but there was no talk of Bibi was Mr. Security, and consequently the Israelis felt at least confident in that. The nation was falling apart over judicial reform, but now Bibi has lost his security card. The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has lost his security card, and his entire strategy for the Gaza Strip has been proven to be vacuous and barren. And that means that Israel's strategy was it wanted to not deal with the Palestinian Authority, because they ultimately make a political demand on Israel for, as it were, a two-state solution. He wanted to deal with Hamas, which he felt could be dealt with by bribing them, money coming in, hundreds of millions and billions of dollars coming in from Qatar.
We just need to clarify to our audience. We're talking now before October 7th.
Before October 7th.
Yes, just to clarify. Okay.
Bribing Hamas, providing some jobs, and many of these jobs were in the villages and kibbutzim and towns that were ultimately decimated on October 7th, providing jobs for some some Gaza residents to work in Israel, bribing Hamas by allowing all that money to come in, and periodically presuming that he would have to, quotation marks, mow the lawn, which is the word that's being used in Hebrew, which means that there would be time-to-time attacks, but the situation was, quotation marks, tolerable. After October 7th, the situation is intolerable. Israel still has 100,000 or more internal refugees of its own, and it's also in a in a little bit of a pre-war situation in the north, with rockets flying, attacks being made, this move, that move, the other thing, constrained warfare, but not all out warfare. And there is assumption on many that there is going to be an inevitable battle for Lebanon, but that also depends on a couple of things. It depends um, on the role that Hezbollah has assumed in Lebanon, in which they've assumed some responsibility for the state and some responsibility for the civilian population. And one understands that that would be devastating to Lebanon, as it would be devastating in the north, because the rockets that Hezbollah has are precision rockets that could target Israeli infrastructure, Israeli cities, and the presumption is they know what they're doing.
Wait, let me
What
clarify again. You're saying that Hezbollah's rockets are better or more sophisticated than what Hamas has. Is that correct?
we know that Hezbollah's rockets are far more sophisticated than what Hamas has. Hamas did enormous damage on October 7th. Its rockets, given the Iron Dome and Israel's capacity to shoot them down, its rockets have been a nuisance, um, an outrage, a pain, forcing you to go into shelters, forcing you to pull off the side of the road, etc., etc. But they haven't inflicted, thank God, and not yet, they haven't inflicted major damage of significant proportion, certainly nothing the equivalent of the like. So we have a problem which nobody has a viable strategy at this point. Israel can tell you what it wants to achieve, but has no announced plans for the day after. What do you want to do once you've done what you want to do? Who's going to control, who's going to deal, who's going to grapple with Gaza, what's going to happen with the civilian population, etc., etc. No announced plans, and in fact, whatever the announced plans are, they might very seriously divide the government itself. The American plan at this point is twofold. The announced American plan is that we want a reinvigorated Palestinian Authority to take control of Gaza. There is no such thing as a reinvigorated Palestinian Authority. It is a limping institution that has not had the type of leadership. Its president hasn't faced elections in 15 or 16 years. He's 88 years old, and you don't even have a clear succession plan of a different generation of leadership, and getting them to be robust and capable of governing Gaza when Israel has done many steps to weaken them in the West Bank means that you don't have a viable American strategy. There is talk of a shoot for the moon type of strategy, which is asking the Arab nations to step up and to take responsibility for Gaza, giving Israel relations with Saudi Arabia, expelling the remaining Hamas fighters from Gaza, and letting the Arab nations have it in a trusteeship with some sort of political horizon for the Palestinians. That would mean that you would need the Arab nations to step up and accept responsibility. That would mean that Saudi Arabia would have to really pull the plug with regard to its hesitation to deal with Israel, though it's dealing with Israel all the time. And it would mean that you'd have to shoot for the moon. That would help Bibi in terms of staying in power, because it would be a tremendous victory. It would certainly help Joe Biden in terms of staying in power, because it would show a masterful political touch. It depends on the Arabs and the question of, and we said, Abba even once said of the Palestinian Authority, they never lost, of the Palestinians at that point, they never lost an opportunity to lose an opportunity. There is some feeling in Israel that Israel never lost an opportunity to lose an opportunity. And this is the type of political moment where very strong, imaginative, creative political leadership can step in. I'm using an analogy in one sense. There's an old Hasidic story of two men are lost in the forest, desperately lost in the forest. They come to a clearing and they ask each other, how do we get out of the forest? And they say, well, I can tell you one thing for sure, my way is not the way. And if my way is not the way and your way is not the way, there must be another way to get out of the forest. And that's the moment at which we need tremendous creative leadership.
Wait, I
There are
want to ask
some,
you, wait, I want to ask you a question. Why would the Arab nations say yes? Why did they want this headache? What do you think?
first of all, this is a look, let's be candid. The Arab nations, many of the Arab nations detest Hamas. They are affiliated with Muslim Brotherhood, which is the enemy of Egypt. Destabilization weakens the Jordanian government. Saudi Arabia is in the middle of, is at the beginning of a transition from a resource-based economy to a knowledge-based economy. And resource-based economy was based on oil. A knowledge-based economy is based on what its population can do. It's made major changes with regard to the participation of 50% of its population, meaning its attitude toward women, and letting them drive was only one step of that. And in a knowledge-based economy, Israel has shown the way of being the knowledge-based economy with all of this startup nation and their sequential book, which came out at a bad time, called The Genius of Israel. And The Genius of Israel appeared much less genius on October 7th than it was on October 6th. But in a knowledge-based economy, cooperation and collaboration makes sense. And Israel has a resource that Saudi Arabia would like to avail of itself of, which is water, because of its successful efforts at desalinization. So there are reasons why they would do that. There clearly are reasons why they should not and would not do that. Number one is the street is far more anti-Israel than the leadership. Number two, Gaza is a hellhole. And why would you accept responsibility for a hellhole? The United Nations is not equipped to deal with Gaza because we saw the degree to which there was over cooperation between UNRWA, the United States relief, the United Nations relief and refugee organization. There was too much cooperation between UNRWA and Hamas. They got what you would call clientitis. UN peacekeepers have not been effective in the region. So I can tell you all the reasons why they would not step up and few of the reasons why they should step up. And I can tell you we're at the clearing of the forest, and what's clear is the way of Israel has not worked. The way of Hamas has not worked. What the United States is proposing has not worked, et cetera, and there needs to be another way to get out of the forest. But the danger to the Arab world of this is essentially that there is a destabilization that occurs, which is dramatic. Now let's talk about a couple of things of internal Israeli elements. It's unclear that the army is operating with one voice and one command. And that is that, and I don't know this, I'm just intuiting it, it's something you feel. They've taken interesting steps that are profoundly dangerous without having it part of a larger picture. Example, if you're negotiating with Hamas for a hostage deal, that may not be the moment at which you kill the children and grandchildren of the leader of Hamas in Qatar. One does not imagine that one comes comes to a deal in the immediate aftermath of that loss. Who made that decision? Why was that decision made?
You
And
don't think it was, you think it was targeted. You don't think it was just they knew it was Hamas and didn't know who it was.
I think they knew. I suspect that they knew. I can't say I know for sure. I suspect that they knew who it was. But if you want a hostage deal, that's not the moment to do precisely that. Secondly, you don't shoot, and they've already fired 3 or 4 officers. You don't shoot on aid workers when the issue is bringing aid into Gaza. Unless you have people in the army who come out of the same tradition as Mr. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who don't want the situation to settle down, because who feel that this may be the opportunity for some large scale operation, and who are even talking about reoccupying Gaza and therefore destabilizing the entire situation. And also, let's go back to when the Israelis shot at their own hostages trying to come out, and ask the question, who was the shooter? And was the shooter indeed of the extreme right, who felt any dead Arab is a good Arab, and consequently thought that this would be an occasion? And by the way, there was a major failure on that, and they could have taken a lesson from the Americans on that. Remember back to the Iraq War, that America handed out baseball cards with 100 top of Iraqi leaders.
No, I don't remember that. Interesting.
There is no reason why every Israeli soldier had not gotten a baseball card. I mean,
Hat.
obviously, Israel would not give a baseball card, but a deck of cards in which you had a picture of all 240 hostages and the like, and go through that so you could recognize them on sight. Add to them, the men presume have not shaved, so they have a beard, but all of the defining characteristics. If you presume that the hostages are there and they have to be saved, you need to know who the hell the hostages are. So I am a little, consider me suspicious. Consider me suspicious as to whether the army is in speaking with one voice, or whether the political divisions have been paralleled in some divisions within the army, and some people taking initiatives peculiarly and uniquely their own. I don't know that for a fact. My instinct, and sometimes I trust my instinct for political analysis, is that support for the prime minister is an all-time low, even in the United States. Bret Stephens essentially was former editor of the Jerusalem Post, a columnist of the New York Times, deeply pro-Israel, said 2 things. He said, Israel must prevail, must defeat Hamas, and Bibi must go. And now that there's considerable talk, remember, nobody asked Golda to resign during the war. But the Yom Kippur
We're
War
talking
was
right, Yom Kippur War.
during the Yom Kippur War, but the war was 3 weeks long. This is now 189 days. It's more than half a year. And the question becomes, can you operate with a leader you do not trust? And can you operate in a moment in which, on the deepest level, you are not sure if, given a choice between what is good for the state and what is good for his own survival politically, he will choose what is good for the state. And that is a profoundly dangerous position. I suspect, and I think I have evidence, that Bibi is a diminished figure, even himself. In the middle of all of this, he had a hernia operation, which demanded that he be sedated
Yes.
completely. I belong to a generation where many of my friends have had hernia operations, and many of them have had it laparoscopically and were only sedated, not completely, but partially. This is the second or third time he's been hospitalized, and the question becomes is whether he is healthy enough to carry on. And there is some evidence. A very knowledgeable figure yesterday told me that Ron Dermer, who is the man Bibi trusts the most at this moment, had suggested that Bibi do what he do best, which is to go out and speak and command the stage, etc., and he has not done that. You can't imagine in any other circumstances the Benjamin Netanyahu we knew would not take the stage and command the stage and command the media. And we're 189 days, and he's been singularly what?
Missing in action.
Missing in action in the public sphere, even if in the private sphere. Now, he's also serving in a government in which half the government wants to topple him from the right, and the other half of the government wants to replace him, and his own party wants to replace him if they could. And it's not that the party wants to replace him. There are probably a half dozen, and I'm using the term men because they really are all men, men in Likud who wake up in the morning and say, I should be prime minister.
Mhm.
A friend of mine who was a senator said, we have 100 people who shave every morning in the United States Senate, or at least 100. You don't have 100, you have 90 who shave every morning, and 10 who look in the mirror and fix their hair and the like, all of whom say, I should be president of the United States. Um, uh, so there is tremendous internal division. And the longer the war carries out and the less effective its leadership is, the more one wonders how long can it last. What's the good
Michael,
news?
yeah, I was going to say, we only have a few minutes. Could you please give us some good news?
I think the good news again is that the people of Israel are better than its leadership. That the informal channels and the citizen channels are working terrifically and with each other. And there's a spirit of unity in a very deep way. And the word that people are using is Ein li eretz acheret. I do not have another land. Here I am. Now that's different than some people. I had breakfast with a colleague of mine, a former colleague at the United States Holocaust Memorial Council, who said, my kids look like they're going to get out of here. And that is that one of the dangers to Israel is the possibility of a brain drain. Her son is in high tech. Her son is capable of getting a job anywhere. If he left Israel on a Monday, he could be hired by 5 corporations. By Friday, he has dual citizenship, as do many Israelis. And the problem is whether there's going to be brain drain that takes place, or whether there's a sense of we're going to stick it out and do it. And in one sense, had the war gone quickly, then problems could be resolved. We're at a stalemate. And in one sense, we had a truce during Ramadan, but we didn't call it that. The fighting was slight, it was quiet, and the like. Whether now, post Ramadan, it will heat up. And the other thing to look for is the north, where now that the ground is solid, Israel can go in with tanks, which it could not do before. And again, its goal is to get Hezbollah to move north beyond the Litani River, which is what the original agreement was, and therefore to give itself some space. So I wish I could say that I came back from Israel optimistic. I did not come back from Israel optimistic. I came back seeing many more problems than I saw solutions. And I saw, what shall I say? I saw people who are enduring it. I almost felt like the country was in the dentist chair in which you put up with the drilling because you got to get drilled. But the question is, how long do you get drilled before the teeth itself disappear? To use a bad analogy.
Not a very uplifting one. Michael, we thank you as again for your insight, for your availability to share what you've learned on the ground. We can only hope that we don't have to do another one because the next one we do is after the fact, but I don't know that we can hold up that optimism.
I think that we can be guaranteed at this moment that we will do another one and another one after that. It's not that I need steady employment, and it's not that I don't enjoy being with you, period. But the situation is deeply and profoundly problematic. Let me conclude with this because I've been saying it. You and I lived at a time where it was easy to be a Jew. And now we have to develop in our children and their children three things at the same time. Number one, it's difficult to be a Jew. In Yiddish, they said, "Es ist schwer zu sein a Jew, a Yid."
Mhm.
That was true of our grandparents who knew that intuitively, and never expected to have it. They couldn't imagine that we could have it as easy as we did. We're now at a time where we have it with some great difficulty. The second thing, in addition to schwer sein a Yid, it's difficult to be a Jew, is we need tenacity and some thick skin because we're going to face difficult problems. And the third is that we need to counter all this anguish by a sense that being Jewish itself has the capacity to be valuable and joyous, sacred and significant. And we have to balance all of the evil that we are facing with that realization, and even with the realization that we can have joy as a Jew. And that's what we have to educate for.
Not only will I say amen to it, but I will say to Michael, because we're in the same time zone, go to the same synagogue, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.